Everyone. So my mother was unable to make it tonight. She is celebrating her birthday with my father. So I have the pleasure of filling in for her and learning with you all this evening. As you know, tonight's class is going to be about the upcoming holiday of Shavuot, which we are celebrating next week. It starts next Saturday night. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for logging on. And we're going to be beginning just shortly. I love when these classes are interactive. So it's harder over Zoom because, we're not in person, but please don't be shy. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. Let me just get my computer ready. I see a few more ladies logging on, so we'll wait just one more moment and then we will begin. Again, ladies, please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any thoughts that you would like to share. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you for logging on. Hi. I'll just say again, I'm filling in for my mother. She is celebrating her birthday, and so we're giving her a little vacation. I'm filling in for her, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. So Shavuot is coming up. Next week, we are going to celebrate this amazing holiday called Shavuot. And there's so much to explore on this topic. Shavuot is the holiday where we received the Torah, as we know. And so it's a very, very big occasion for us as the Jewish nation. And we're going to explore a few ideas. We're going to begin with an overview of the holiday, just so we can refresh our memory. What are the things we do to celebrate this holiday? And we'll give some deeper insights. And the second part of the class will delve into a few key points regarding the holiday of Shavuot. So let's begin. What does the word Shavuot mean? Does anybody know? Let's try to make this as interactive as possible. You can use the chat or you can unmute yourself. Does anyone know what the word Shavuot means?
Weeks.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. The word Shavuot means weeks.
It was Gail. It was Gail.
Oh, Gail, sorry.
How are you?
Good, thank God. Good, thank you, Gail. Sorry. Hi, Cheryl. So for some reason, it looked like it was coming from that box. Okay, so Shavuot means weeks. And what is the reason that we named this holiday weeks? Because the holiday of Shavuot comes after 7 weeks of counting. What does this mean? From the second night of Passover until the holiday of Shavuot, we are commanded to count 49 days, which is 7 weeks. And the reason why the word, just interesting, the reason why the word Shavua in Hebrew means week is because 7 in Hebrew is Shava. And so there's 7 days in a week. So in Hebrew, Shava, Shavuot means weeks because there's 7 days in a week. So we count 7 weeks from the second night of Passover until the night of Shavuot. Shavuot is the 50th day from Passover. So we call this holiday weeks because it comes after the counting of 7 weeks. Now, another reason why we call the holiday Shavuot is because the word Shavuot actually has another meaning as well. A Shavua in Hebrew is an oath, a promise, or a vow. So Shavuot is really essentially celebrating the oath or the vow that the Jewish people made to God and God made to the Jewish people. We know that the relationship between the Jewish people and God is compared to a marriage. And we're going to talk about that a little deeper later on in the class. But often the Jewish people and God are compared to a marriage. We are the bride and God is our groom. And there are many, many metaphors of this in the Torah. We know Shir HaShirim is a book that was written by King Solomon, and the entirety of Shir HaShirim is this love song between the Jewish people and God. And the giving of the Torah is like the wedding ceremony of us and God. That is why a Jewish wedding has many similarities. It's actually the wedding itself is mimicking the giving of the Torah. So all of the customs that we do at a Jewish wedding, a chuppah, the chuppah is compared to the mountain, to Mount Sinai. The Torah is the ketubah, the marriage contract between God and the Jewish people. So the Jewish wedding is like a mini version of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah, which was the grand wedding between God and the Jewish people. And of course, a wedding is a commitment between two people. And that's why it's called Shavuot, which means oaths in the plural. Not one oath, but two oaths. What two oaths? The oath between God and God to the Jewish people, where God committed himself to the Jewish people and chose them as his nation, as well as the oath between the Jewish people and God, where we, as the Jewish people, accepted the Torah and committed ourselves to following the teachings of the Torah. So those are the two reasons why we call this holiday Shavuot. Number one, the weeks that we count leading up to Shavuot. And number two, the oath that we commit to on Shavuot. We commit to God and we commit to the Torah. So something I love about Jewish holidays and about Jewish history is that it's not just us as Jews living in 2022 recalling the past or, commemorating something that happened thousands of years ago. It's a lot deeper than that. When it comes to Jewish holidays, we're not just doing things to recall the past, but we're actually reliving the energy of that holiday. And every holiday has its own energy and its own lessons that teach us. And when we celebrate that holiday, we are actually reliving that that lesson that the holiday is there to teach us. And so I feel that this is very very practical when it comes to the progression of Passover to Shavuot. So what happened when the Jewish people were in Egypt and they were slaves, and God freed them from Egypt? And the freedom from Egypt is celebrated every year as Passover. That's why we celebrate Passover. And the theme of Passover, and as we know from the classes that we've had and all of the, the lessons we learn about Passover, is all about freedom. And what that means for us in living in 2022 is that every person has something that enslaves them in their life. We obviously are not physically slaves, but we all have something that enslaves us. And the lessons of Passover teach us how to break out of those enslavements and to be truly free human beings. And then we go from Passover to the 49 days of the Omer, the Sfirat HaOmer. And this is what we were mentioning before, the 49 days, the 7 weeks that we count leading up to Shavuot. And the reason why we count 49 days, we know nothing in the Torah is random. Everything has a deeper meaning. Why is there 49 days between Passover and Shavuot? Because when the Jews left Egypt, they traveled for 49 days through the desert until they reached Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah. Now, why did it take them 49 days to reach Mount Sinai? Because Kabbalah explains that there are 49 levels of impurity. And the Jewish people in Egypt were on the lowest level of impurity. They had spent hundreds of years in Egypt. The Egyptians were very immoral people, and the Jewish people kind of adopted and kind of integrated into the Egyptian culture, and they had taken on some of that impurity of Egypt. And so the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were on the lowest level. They were actually on the 49th level of impurity. And it says they were steeped in idolatry, and they had, they had really negative neighbors living all those years in Egypt, and they had taken on some of those negative behaviors. And so in order for the Jewish people to be worthy of receiving the Torah, they had to climb the ranks of holiness, and they had to leave the impurity behind and climb the 49 levels until they reached a place where they were no longer impure and they were ready to receive the Torah. And so that's why we count the 49 days, and what we focus on during these 49 days is what the Jewish people focused on back then, where they were improving themselves and refining themselves to be worthy of receiving the Torah. And so during these 49 days, we examine our character and we examine ourselves and we say, where can I improve? Each day, there's actually a different character trait that we work on and that we focus on and try to improve. In our previous women's classes, we learned about the Sfirot. So anyone who was on those classes knows that we learned about every person has 10 Sfirot, and each one is a different personality trait. And the 49 days, each day we focus on another Sphira and how to rectify that trait within ourselves. And so we're like refining ourselves to be ready for this holiday of Shavuot that is coming up. And what happens on Shavuot? Of course, we receive the Torah. And again, just like Passover, we relive that freedom. And just like the 49 days, we relive that self-work and that, that self-refinement. So too on Shavuot, we're not just commemorating the fact that the Jewish people received the Torah over 3,000 years ago. We're actually re-accepting the Torah from God. Every Shavuot, God re-gives us the Torah anew. And we, as the Jewish people, accept God again. So we said that it's like a marriage between God and the Jewish people. And just like in a healthy marriage, when the anniversary comes around every year, it's not just a time to remember the wedding day. It is a special time to, reminisce about the wedding day, but it's actually what a real anniversary is about, is rekindling the love and saying, maybe throughout this past year, we had some fallouts. Maybe we got stuck in the monotony of day in, day out, and we lost some of that spark. We lost some of that love. And the anniversary is a day to recommit and rekindle the love and rekindle the romance in the relationship. And so too, every year on Shavuot, we're not just remembering the original giving of the Torah, we're rekindling that spark between us and God. We're like we said, it's an oath. We're recommitting and vowing to keep the Torah and to learn the Torah and to keep the mitzvot. And so this coming Shavuot, we should, really think of it as such, that God is giving me the Torah anew, and I am recommitting to God, I'm recommitting to the Torah, and I'm recommitting to my fellow man. So something that's interesting about Shavuot is that we have many customs on this holiday. Almost all of the things we do to celebrate Shavuot are customs. Now, what's the difference between a custom and a mitzvah? A custom is called a minhag, and a mitzvah is a mitzvah. So a mitzvah is something that God explicitly commanded us to do. God, or through the Torah, the rabbis determine certain mitzvot. We know there are 613 mitzvot, and these are commandments. These are things that the Torah obligates us to do. Now, a minhag, a custom, is not part of the 613 mitzvot. It's something that we, as the Jewish people, took upon ourselves throughout history. And at different points in history, different Jewish communities, that's why different Jews from, Ashkenazim and Sephardim have different customs, because customs are something that Jewish communities took upon themselves. And so Jews living in different parts of the world took on different customs. That's why, Ashkenazi Jews' way of fulfilling the mitzvot is very different than Sephardi. Obviously, there are many similarities, but there's also many differences because we come from different parts of the world, and different Jewish communities took on different customs. Now, Shavuot is full of customs. We're going to go through them now. And and almost no commandments. It's interesting. The only commandments we have is really to celebrate the holiday. But like on Passover, for example, we have a mitzvah, we have a commandment to eat matzah. Um, on on Sukkot, we have a commandment to shake the lulav and the etrog. However, on Shavuot, there are no explicit commandments. Everything we do on Shavuot is actually customs, which is interesting. And the reason is because God is trying to impart a lesson to us, which is that when God gave us the Torah, he not only gave us the mitzvot, one moment, sorry. Sorry. So he not only gave us the mitzvot, but he actually also gave us the customs. What does this mean? When God gave us the mitzvot, he also foresaw all of the customs that would come. And God is saying to us that don't think that the customs are secondary. Don't think that the customs don't matter because, oh, it's just something that we took upon ourselves. It's not really something God requires of me. No, customs are actually really important in Judaism. And in a way, they have a certain advantage over commandments. The reason being that imagine a parent tells a child, please clean up your room. And they come home and they see that the room is clean. They can praise the child for doing a good job, but it's not, the child didn't go above and beyond. They did what they were told. However, if the parent came home and the child cleaned the house all by themselves without being asked, that's like, wow, you're amazing. You went and did this on your own initiative. Good job. That's almost more impressive than the child doing what they're asked. And so too, mitzvot are important, but God is also saying customs are in a way very special to me because it shows your own initiative. It shows that you're doing something for God in your own way, not necessarily because God commanded you to do it, but actually because you felt you wanted to take that initiative. So let's go through the customs that we do to celebrate the holiday of Shavuot. The most well-known one, I think, is that we eat dairy on Shavuot. Shavuot is known as the dairy holiday. We eat ice cream and we eat cheesecake and we eat blintzes. So just as an example, the Torah doesn't say to eat cheesecake on Shavuot. It's a custom that Jewish communities have taken on over the years. And it's become a fundamental part of Shavuot, even though it's not a direct commandment in the Torah. So there are many reasons. Somebody commented they thought that eating cheesecake was a mitzvah. Sorry to break it to you. We can make it one if we want to. It is delicious. So eating dairy on Shavuot is a custom that we take very seriously because it's so delicious. There are 4 reasons why we eat dairy on Shavuot. The first reason is probably the most well-known, and the other 3 are cute ideas as well. So the main reason we eat dairy on Shavuot, of course, is because the Jewish people received the Torah. And we know that in the Torah, there are very intricate, very detailed laws about kosher. One of them being that we don't eat milk and meat together, right? We wait, some people wait either a half hour or an hour between milk and meat. And there's many different customs, again, many different customs when it comes to eating meat and milk, but some people wait 2 hours, some people wait 4 hours, and some people even wait 6 hours between meat and milk. And so on Shavuot, when the Jewish people received the Torah was actually given on Shabbat. And the Jewish people learned for the first time that meat and milk cannot be mixed, they cannot be eaten together, and they learned all of the laws of kosher, basically, once they received the Torah. And so because it was Shabbat and they couldn't kosher, they couldn't make their dishes kosher, and they weren't able to, the laws of slaughtering an animal are very detailed, and they weren't able to do them on the day of Shavuot, so they only ate dairy because they weren't able to keep the the laws of slaughtering an animal on Shabbat. And also these laws were new to them. They had just received the Torah. And so therefore they didn't eat meat and they only ate dairy, cold dairy, I guess, because their dishes weren't kosher. So that's why we eat dairy. One of the reasons we eat dairy, to remember that the Jewish people, upon receiving the laws of kosher, they did not eat meat. They only ate dairy on the holiday of Shavuot. Another reason, which is a cute reason, we know that every word in Hebrew has a numerical value. So the word for dairy in Hebrew is chalav. The numerical value of the word chalav is 40. And chet is 8, lamed is 30, and bet is 2. So 8 plus 30 plus 2 is 40. And we know that the holiday of Shavuot is very connected with the number 40 because Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days to receive the Torah. That's another reason. Another reason we eat dairy on Shavuot is because we're going to speak about this a little bit later, but obviously the main character of the holiday of Shavuot is Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who gave us the Torah. He went up on the mountain and got the Torah for us. And the sixth day of Sivan, which is the day we celebrate Shavuot, is actually the day. Let's see if anyone knows the Passover story. We know in the Passover story that Moses' mother, Yocheved, put Moses in a basket and put him in the Nile River to save his life because Pharaoh had a decree against all Jewish baby boys. Pharaoh wanted to kill every Jewish baby boy because he foresaw that a Jewish boy would be born that would free his slaves from Egypt. And so he decreed that all Jewish baby boys should be thrown into the Nile River. And so Yocheved, Moses' mother, in her wisdom, she created a basket, a wicker basket. She placed her son in the basket and put him on the Nile River so that Pharaoh's stargazers would see in the stars that Moses was already in the Nile River, basically. And we know that Moses was born on the 7th day of Adar, and Moses' mother put him in the water when he was 3 months old. And so that 3 months after the 7th day of Adar is the 6th day of Sivan, which is the day that we receive the Torah, the day we celebrate Shavuot. And so the day that Moses was saved and placed into the basket was the day of Shavuot. Now, how was Moses saved? We know that Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, came to the Nile River to bathe, and she found this baby. She picked him up and she tried to nurse him. And it says that Moshe refused her milk because she was not Jewish. And so she actually returned Moshe to his mother to be able to wean him and to feed him. And Moshe was only returned to the daughter of Pharaoh when he was about a year or 2 years old, but he was actually reunited with his mother on that day because of milk, because he refused to take Pharaoh's daughter's milk. So that's another reason. And the last reason is that just like a baby needs milk to sustain them, it's like the basic nurture, the basic nutrition that a baby needs is milk. So too, the Torah is compared to milk because it sustains us and it gives us our life and it gives us vitality and nutrition, like spiritual nutrition, basically. So Torah is like the basis of our spiritual life, just like milk for a baby is like the basis of their life. That's another reason. I thought that was cute. And so those are the 4 reasons that we drink or we eat dairy. We have milk on Shavuot. I don't know where specifically cheesecake became a thing, maybe because it's a very dairy-filled food. But maybe we'll look into that, why specifically cheesecake and blintzes became a thing. But in general, the idea is to eat dairy. I know we're having an ice cream party at the synagogue. That's also dairy. So another thing that we do on Shavuot is we stay up all night and learn Torah. Now, why do we stay up the entire night learning Torah? Of course, it's to show God. The first reason is to show God how eager we are to receive the Torah. We're so excited to learn it. We're so excited to receive it. It's almost like we can't sleep at night. We just want to stay up all night and learn. But the reason given for why the Jewish people, why we till this day stay up on the night of Shavuot and learn Torah is because it says, this is an interesting medrash, and we're gonna break it apart and unpack it here because it's a little bit funny. It says that when God came the morning of Matan Torah, the morning of the giving of the Torah, God came to give the Torah to the Jewish people. Okay, we counted 49 days. We're ready. Let's go. God comes down on the mountain, and what does he see? The Jewish people are fast asleep. This is what the Medrash says. The Jewish people slept in. They snoozed their alarm clock. They forgot to wake up. And it says, the Medrash, that in order to rectify the mistake of the Jewish people sleeping in the day of the giving of the Torah, we stay up all night and learn the Torah to show God that we are going to forego our sleep and learn Torah instead. Now, what's going on here? The Jewish people, like we said, they just counted 49 days. They have been working for 49 days. Physically, they've been traveling through the desert to reach Mount Sinai. And spiritually, they've been working on themselves and climbing the ranks of holiness, like we said, in preparation for receiving the Torah. How could it be that they slept in? It's like, imagine you're going on a vacation and you've been counting down the days. You have a calendar on your wall, and every day you mark off a day, 49 days until my vacation. And the morning comes, the day of the vacation, and you miss your flight because you slept in. How could that be? How could the Jewish people have slept in the day of the giving of the Torah? So in Hasidut, it is explained that what the Jewish people did is they weren't just being mindless, sleeping in. It actually says that the Jewish people, in preparation for the Torah, they thought that they had to go into a state of spirituality. And so Khasires explains that they weren't actually in a sleep, like a physical sleep. They were in like a spiritual meditative state, kind of like a sleep. They thought that in order to receive the Torah, they have to leave their bodies and go into a meditative spiritual state. And that's the state they were in when God came to give them the Torah. However, this was not what God wanted. He didn't want them to be in a meditative state. He wanted them to be present with their physical bodies. And so God was teaching them a lesson that the giving of the Torah is not in order to make us like angels, like spiritual beings that meditate and sit on a mountaintop and go into a trance. That's not what God wants. He wants us to be present in our physical bodies, and he wants the Torah, the lessons of the Torah, to permeate our physical bodies and our physical reality. And the giving of the Torah, it says, was the merging of heaven and earth. Before the giving of the Torah, there was a decree that separated heaven and earth. Heaven and spirituality remained above, and physicality remained below. And there was no way to elevate this physical world. It says that Abraham, he made phylacteries, and he made them out of sticks and straps. And when he was done using them, he discarded of them. He no longer needed them. But we know that when we use a physical object for a mitzvah, that physical object remains holy even when we're done using it. And there's actually something called shamus. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this, but we don't throw out holy objects. For example, if somebody has a siddur that rips, right? They can no longer use it, this prayer book. You're not allowed to throw it in the garbage, even if it's ripped, even if it's completely damaged and unusable. We actually bury it in Jewish cemeteries. There's a certain plot that's reserved for what we call shamus, where we bury holy objects that can no longer be used. Another example, like we said, tefillin. If somebody's tefillin gets damaged, they're not allowed to throw it out. They have to bury it. Another example is
I've heard of this being buried. Yes, I do. I have a question about this.
Sure, of course.
Now if it has G-O-D in a newspaper, some people tell me that you're able to throw out. But
Yes.
I always thought that you're not supposed to throw it out if it has the word Hashem, G-O-D.
Right. So when it comes to English, it's interesting. A lot of people are careful not to write G-O-D, and they'll write G-D for that.
That's what I was always taught.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason. Definitely, if God's name is written in Hebrew, you're not allowed to throw it out. It must be put in Shemus. It must be buried. However, I'm not sure when it comes to English, like G-O-D. I think it's okay to throw it out, but it's better not to. That's why people will write G-D instead of.
Yeah, because there's a conflict. Some people say that you can throw it out and other people don't. So I want to literally know what's the proper thing. I usually just, anytime I'm reading a newspaper and I see, like on Shabbos, I literally fold the page down so I know not to throw out that newspaper, recycle it. And in my house, I have one spot where I put it. Our temple used to have a place in the temple where people used to bring it, but I haven't seen it in a while, in the temple. Because now they charge you to do it.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I think in a newspaper, it wouldn't be a problem to throw it out because it really only refers to Torah learning. So if it's God's name in a Torah passage, does that make sense? It has to be like let's say there's a something that's talking about God in the context of like Torah learning, that may be problematic. But just referring to God in an article that has nothing to do with Torah, that I don't think there's a problem with throwing it in the garbage. I think it's specifically like Torah or prayers. So Myra just wrote in the chat, if you ever have Shemus, you could drop it off at the synagogue and we send it to the Jewish cemetery to be buried. So this is just a good example of how in Judaism.
But I live in New Jersey, not in Florida.
Okay.
I come to a lot of your classes.
I'm sure that
our synagogue. I'm sure in New Jersey they have lots of synagogues that do the very same thing.
Yeah, I know. That's why I have it here in my house in a special place. I don't throw it out.
Yes. Okay. Smart. Good for you. So this is a perfect example of how in Judaism, physical objects become holy when they're used for holiness. It's not just that we sit and we meditate and we think about God. We actually use physical objects to serve God, and those objects become holy. And that is exactly what happened when God gave us the Torah. There was a merging of heaven and earth. Spirituality came down into the physicality, and physicality went up to spirituality. We are now able to elevate physical things and make them holy. And that's the example we gave of a physical piece of paper. If it has God's name written on it, or if it has a prayer written on it, inherently it is holy and it cannot be discarded of. And so, where was I? How did we get to this topic? So when God saw the Jewish people were asleep, he said, no, you did the wrong thing, because you're not supposed to remove yourself from this physical world. You're not supposed to go into a trance-like state of meditation and forget about the physical world. The point of the Torah is to use the physicality, to elevate this world to become a holy place, to take the physical world and make it holy. And that's the lesson we learn from the Jewish people sleeping in on the day of Shavuot. And that's why we stay up at night and learn the Torah, to show God that we are going to learn the Torah in this world. We're going to stay awake, and we're going to use the physical objects in our life to create holiness. The Another quick custom, let's just go through the last few customs quickly. Another custom we have is to decorate the synagogue with flowers. You may see a beautiful beautiful bouquets of flowers in the synagogue on Shavuot. The reason is because it says that Mount Sinai was a very simple mountain. And when God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, it blossomed with beautiful greenery and beautiful flowers. And to commemorate the beauty of Mount Sinai, we decorate the synagogue with flowers. And the last thing that we do on Shavuot is we read the story of Ruth. We're not going to go into it now, but I'm sure on Shavuot there will be speakers who will go through the story in depth, because there's so much depth in this story. There's so much meaning, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. But for anyone that knows, Ruth was a convert. She was actually like the quintessential convert. And her phrase that she said to her mother-in-law, I'm not going to go into the story now because it will just take us on a whole new tangent, but she said to her mother-in-law, your God is my God. Your Torah is my Torah. There's a beautiful phrase that she says when she converts, and that is like the basis of every Jewish convert for forever. She is the quintessential convert in Judaism, and she's also the grandmother of King David. So why do we read the story of Ruth on Shavuot? For two reasons. Number one is because she is a convert, and on Shavuot we all became converts. We all went from a people to the Jewish people. When we received the Torah is when the entire Jewish people almost like converted to Judaism. We all became Jews on the day of Matan Torah, the day we received the Torah. So because Shavuot is the day that we all became Jewish, we read the story of Ruth, who was the first or the biggest convert that we read about in the Torah. And the second reason is because, like we said, she is the grandmother of King David. And Shavuot is also the yahrzeit, the day of passing of King David. And so to commemorate King David and his ancestry, we read the story of Ruth. So those are the things, the customs that we do to celebrate Shavuot. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time. We're going to move on to something, another concept when it comes to Shavuot. Something we'll go a little more in depth with. So there are three main characters of Shavuot. We mentioned two of them. The first one, we said Moshe. Moses is the one who gave us the Torah. He's the one who went up on Mount Sinai. And he is the one who, like we said, the day of Shavuot was the day that he was saved from the Nile River and returned to his mother, Yocheved. The second Jewish leader that is very connected with the day of Shavuot is King David. He passed away on Shavuot. And the third Jewish leader who is very connected with this day because he also passed away on the day of Shavuot is the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. So we have two yahrzeits, King David and the Baal Shem Tov, and we have Moses, who is the one who went up onto Mount Sinai and gave us the Torah. Now, there must be a connection between these three Jewish leaders, Moses, David, and the Baal Shem Tov. And there must be a deeper connection between all three of them and the actual day of Shavuot. So we mentioned before that on Shavuot, the day that God gave us the Torah, there was this, the breaking of the decree that the spiritual worlds can come down into this physical world, that we have the ability, now that we have the Torah, we have the ability to elevate physicality and make the physical world into a spiritual home for God. And the way that this happened is actually in a three-step process that is represented by these three figures, Moses, David, and the Baal Shem Tov. Moses was the one who went up onto the mountain and gave us the Torah. And it says that when Moshe went up onto the mountain, Moses said that the 10 commandments, but actually God said the first 2 commandments. And what happened when God said the first 2 commandments? It says that the Jewish people hearing God's voice was so overwhelming and so intense that their physical bodies were unable to handle it. It was actually too intense for them. And it says that their souls departed from their bodies and they died. They like completely were not able to handle hearing God's voice. And so God restored their souls into their bodies. This is what the Medrash says. And the Jewish people came to Moses and they begged Moses. They said, we cannot handle this. You must be the one to tell us the 10 commandments. We cannot hear God's voice. It's too intense. It's too overwhelming. And so Moses said commandments 3 to 10. So God said the first 2 and Moses said the rest. And the reason why the Jewish people couldn't handle hearing God's voice is because God and his voice, of course, is the ultimate of spirituality, and the Jewish people were still in their physical bodies. And when God came down onto the mountain, the revelation was so intense and so overwhelming because it was something that was imposed on them, meaning the Jewish people didn't necessarily do anything to warrant this great revelation. God was giving it to them as a gift. That's why the Torah is a gift. It's something that God gave to us, not necessarily because the Jewish people deserved this revelation, and therefore they weren't able to handle the revelation because it was something that was brought upon them. It was heaven coming down to earth. And for the Jewish people, the earthly human beings, it was too intense. And so Moses and his era was an era where God came down to earth. God descended onto Mount Sinai and brought spirituality down into this physical world. Now, King David, in his era, it was a time where the Jewish people were able to take physicality and elevate it up to God. How? Where does this come from? King David represents 2 things. Number 1 is kingship. Of course, we know that King David was the first. Well, no, King Saul was the first king, but King David represents Jewish kingship. All future kings come from King David. And so during King David's era, he was the king, and a Jewish king is not a dictator. A Jewish king is somebody that the Jewish people anoint to be their leader. And that's why the relationship between a king and his subjects is not dependent on anything. It's something that the subjects choose, meaning a parent and child have an inherent relationship. Their relationship revolves around nurture and love and the fact that they are a product. The child is the product of the parent and the parent's responsibility. Or a teacher and a student, right? Their relationship revolves around learning, around an intellectual superiority, where the teacher has something to teach the student, and that's what their relationship revolves around. So most relationships have something that they are created around. A king and a subject, however, is a completely, what's the word? It's a completely no, I don't want to say selfless. It's something that it's not dependent on anything. It's completely independent. It's something where the subject chooses the king, and therefore whatever the king says is the subject's command, not because the king created the subject like a parent and a child, not because the king has something to teach the subject like a student and a teacher. Not even because, the king is paying the subject to do something for him. It's something where the subject chooses the king to be his king, and therefore he follows his every word because of that. And secondly, we know that King David, he didn't build the temple. His son, King Solomon, built the temple, but King David laid the ground for the temple to be built. King David, he conquered Jerusalem, and he united the Jewish people to be able to build the temple when his son King Solomon became king. That's when the temple was built. And so King David represents these two things: kingship and the temple being built. And we know that this was the era where the Jewish people were able to accept God as their king. Just like they accepted King David, it was when the Jewish people were able to internalize, just like they were able to internalize God being their king and the Torah law being something that they accepted. Whereas during the giving of the Torah, they weren't able to internalize it because it was imposed on them from God. God was giving them the Torah. And so therefore, it was almost too intense for them. They weren't able to handle it, and they weren't able to truly internalize it because it was given to them by God. In the era of King David, the Jewish people took it upon themselves, meaning they accepted it. And therefore, it was able to be internalized because it was something that they were taking upon themselves. And we see this with the temple. The temple is the example, because what was special about the temple? We know before the temple, there was a tabernacle, the Mishkan. So what was unique about the temple that was different than the Mishkan? The Mishkan was portable. We know that it moved from place to place. When the Jewish people traveled through the desert, at each spot in the desert, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, came with them. The temple, the Beit HaMikdash, was not portable. It was permanent. It was placed on Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount, and it didn't move. So, until it was destroyed. So the difference between the temple and the tabernacle is that when the tabernacle moved from one place to the next, the place where it was previously, as soon as the tabernacle departed from that spot was no longer a holy place. The holiness was not absorbed into that spot. The holiness was the tabernacle. And so when the tabernacle left, the holiness left. However, we said that King David was the one who had the Jewish people in his era absorb the Torah and take it in and make the physical world a holier place. And that's what the temple represents, because the temple was a permanent structure. And even when the temple was destroyed, the land, the ground, the very spot where the temple resided is forever a holy spot, because the very physical earth was able to absorb that holiness. And that's why until this day, the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, is a holy place. And some Jews won't even if we were allowed by the Israeli government to go onto the Temple Mount, there are some people that won't even go because they don't want to accidentally walk on the Holy of Holies, because we don't know exactly where the Holy of Holies was. And so we know that the Holy of Holies was reserved for the high priest. No one was allowed to walk into the Holy of Holies. And so some Jews would not even go onto the Temple Mount because they're afraid to accidentally walk in the place of the Holy of Holies. Because even though the physical structure is no longer there, the very earth itself has absorbed the holiness of the temple. The physical spot of the temple is forever holy, which connects to what we were saying before, where because of the giving of the Torah, we have the ability to take physical objects, the physical ground in this case, or the physical piece of paper, or the physical leather straps of tefillin. They become holy. When we use them for Torah, when we use them for mitzvot, they in and of themselves become holy. Even though they are physical, they become elevated and they become spiritual objects. And that's exactly what happened at the giving of the Torah. I'm going to pause this point because I see there's some questions. Does someone have a...
Mindy and Janet, what you're saying is beautiful, but I want to ask you, so that means when we went to Shiloh,
Yes.
you're saying it felt spiritual, it felt holy to me, but it's not really holy anymore?
That's a good question. So Janet was with us in Israel last summer, and we went to Shiloh. So I wouldn't say that. the tabernacle was in Shiloh for many, many years. That was almost like the permanent spot of the tabernacle because, well, first of all, I'll start with Shiloh is in Israel. So it automatically is holy because we know the entire land of Israel is holy.
Okay,
I'm
good.
talking about in the desert before they arrived in Israel, the places where the tabernacle stopped, we don't even know where they are because they're almost irrelevant because as soon as the tabernacle left, they were no longer there. Now, Janet, what you're asking is very interesting, but I think the answer to your question is that the Shiloh was the final resting spot of the tabernacle. And we know that the tabernacle is most probably buried there. That's why we saw so many pieces of, what's it called? Like jugs and
Shards of pottery.
jars
There's
of pottery. Exactly. We saw so many like remnants that archaeologists found of the tabernacle because that was
Artifacts.
the final location. So I think Shiloh has an inherent holiness because that was the tabernacle's final location and it's buried underneath. So
Okay.
I think that might be the answer, but
I
that is
think that's a great answer. That's a great answer because it sure felt holy.
yeah, it definitely is holy. I don't want to take away from Shiloh. Shiloh is amazing. And it's also the place where Hannah prayed for a child. And so it definitely has that energy. It definitely has that holiness. I'm talking more about like the temporary spots in the desert outside of the land of Israel where the tabernacle stopped throughout their 40 years journeying in the desert. But I wouldn't include Shiloh in that. Shiloh is a very holy spot. But we know that, the Temple Mount is, Jews from all over the world come to the Kotel. Why? It's just a brick wall, not a stone wall, not bricks. It's a stone wall. So why is the Kotel it's the center, it's like the holiest spot for Jews. It's our center. It's the place where we pray towards every single day. No matter where in the world you are, we pray towards the Kotel. Why? Because the holiest building on earth resided there. And so those stones, the stones of the Kotel, are holy. Like they possess spirituality, they possess holiness. And it's an amazing concept that I think is unique to Judaism, that a physical object, a physical stone, like think about it, the Kotel is a wall of stones, but those physical stones have absorbed holiness. They have absorbed spirituality. And that's why we go there to pray. And even here in West Palm Beach, we pray towards the Kotel because that is a place of immense holiness. And so King David was the one who represented physicality absorbing holiness, physicality being able to be elevated to God. Now, the Baal Shem Tov is a character that may be a little less well known than Moses and King David. But just to give some insight into who the Baal Shem Tov was, the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And he taught his followers Hasidut. So what is Hasidus? It is the breakdown of the Zohar. It's based on the Zohar, on Kabbalah. And basically what Hasidus does is it takes Kabbalistic ideas, which are usually very lofty and very difficult to understand and difficult to digest. And it takes these very, very lofty concepts and it breaks them down in terms that every person can understand. And so what Hasidus really is the human mind, the human intellect being able to understand godly concepts. And so the Baal Shem Tov represents step 3. If Moses was step 1, heaven coming down to earth, God descending on Mount Sinai, and King David was step 2, the earth absorbing godliness, then the Baal Shem Tov was step 3, where each human being can understand a godly concept, which is a very nuanced idea. But when you learn Hasidus, which is a lot of what we've been discussing now is found in Hasidus, what it really is, it describes God and it describes the effect of a mitzvah in a spiritual way. What is the spiritual effect of a mitzvah? What is the spiritual effect of learning Torah? It describes concepts like a soul. How do you describe a soul? A soul is a spiritual thing. How can a person learn about a soul? But that's what Hasidus does. It talks about spiritual concepts in physical terms that human beings, our intellect, can understand. And so for a human intellect to be able to understand a godly concept like God and souls and creation, these are very lofty concepts, but for a human intellect to be able to understand them, that is the ultimate of merging of physicality and spirituality. When a human being can internalize a godly concept, a godly idea. And that's another reason why the Hasidic movement was very focused on the Messianic era, on Mashiach, because that is the time when there will be the ultimate revelation of godliness. But this time, unlike at Mount Sinai, where the Jewish people were unable to handle it, right? Their souls departed from their bodies because they weren't able to handle the revelation. When Mashiach comes, because the Mashiach is going to come through our efforts in this world, we will be able to handle the revelation. Whereas at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people were not necessarily able to handle the godly revelation because it wasn't something that they worked for. It wasn't, they were just leaving Egypt. It was something that God gave to them as a gift. Whereas Mashiach is going to be something that comes through our efforts, through our good deeds, through our kindness, and through making this world a better place. That is how Mashiach is going to come. And that's why we'll be able to handle the revelation, because it's something that comes through our efforts. And that is represented by the Baal Shem Tov, who was also his yahrzeit, the day of passing, was on Shavuot, because he represents the third step of the process that began on Shavuot at the giving of the Torah. Whereas not only did heaven come down to earth, not only did earth absorb the holiness, but now the earth can be elevated to become a spiritual and holy place, a place where godliness can be revealed, a place where godliness can be seen. I see some comments in the chat. Explain how when you do a mitzvah, it elevates the soul of one who passed. So that's a separate idea. That's like people will do a mitzvah in honor of somebody who passed away. That's the idea of saying the Kaddish, where somebody recites a prayer in honor of the soul of somebody who passed. But that's a different concept. Yeah,
By
it's
the
a
way,
little bit of a separate idea.
By the way, there is books with the Baal Shem Tov. I read them on Shabbos when my daughters, when she was going to school.
I missed the first thing you said.
The Baal Shem Tov, there are books about him, and he tells stories inside books. It's very, very fascinating to read. I try to read at least one story every Shabbos.
Wow.
It's like 3 or 4 books. Yeah.
There are many books. The Baal Shem Tov was a fascinating figure. Like I said, less well known than King David and Moses, but he's like the third step in the chain of Moses, King David, and the Baal Shem Tov. And all 3 of them are very connected with the holiday of Shavuot, because the process that was started by Moses on Shavuot was taken to the next step by King David and completed by the Baal Shem Tov, by spreading the teachings of Khasires for us to be able, like we said, to understand godly concepts. I had something else that I wanted to share, which I thought was interesting, but we are running out of time. I think instead of like moving on to a whole nother subject, it's better to open up for questions. If anyone wants to share their thoughts or ask any questions, because I know it was a bit of a different kind of concept. This is an example of Hasidus, for us to be able to talk about ideas like godliness and spirituality coming down into this world, and the way that holiness can permeate physical objects. That's an example of a Hasidic concept. So that is, I think the bottom line here is that on Shavuot, we should remember that when God gives us the Torah, he's not asking us to neglect our physical lives. He's not asking us to neglect the physicality of this world and kind of go into a lofty zone. He's actually asking us to implement holiness and spirituality into our physical lives. He wants us to combine them. He doesn't want us to neglect either one. He wants us to take physicality and spirituality and merge them and fuse them together. I think that's the bottom line. And I'll end with, I think, a story that really brings this out. So it's a story from the Medrash. It says that when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, there was a small debate between Moses and the angels. So Moses gets up on top of the mountain, and the angels, it says they actually complained to God. And they said, God, what's going on here? You're going to give the Torah to Moses? He's a human being. He's made of flesh and blood. He has a evil inclination. You're going to go and give this holiest, most precious gift on earth to human beings, people that have egos, people that, have jealousy and anger and all of these negative traits. You're going to go and give the Torah to them? Really, God? And the angels were like, why not give the Torah to us? We're perfect. We are the ultimate perfection. We have no ego. We have no negative character traits. We are the ultimate perfection. Give the Torah to us. Don't give the Torah to human beings. And God said to Moses, how about you answer the angels? This is a story set in the Midrash. And what did Moses answer the angels? It says that Moses said to the angels, okay, you make a good point. Let's look inside of the Torah and see what the Torah says. So Moses opens the 10 Commandments and he says, honor your father and mother. And Moses said to the angels, do you have a father and mother to honor? Okay, no. Next, the Torah says, the 10 Commandments say, only serve one God. Do you have ideas of serving other gods? I guess not. The Torah says to deal honestly in business. Do you have business ventures that you have to deal honestly with? Nope. And basically what Moses proved to the angels is that the Torah was meant for imperfect human beings. The Torah is not made for perfect angels. The Torah was made for physical human beings in this physical world that have parents to honor, that have one God to focus on and a lot of other things to block out, that have business interactions that they need to make sure that they're being honest, that have, thoughts about other people that are not so positive and they have to make sure to hold it back and never speak those words. God made the Torah for us, for people that struggle, for people that have an evil inclination that we have to subdue. And so anytime that we think to ourselves, maybe I'm not I have too many things to deal with. I don't think God really cares about why does God need my mitzvot? Why does God care about what I do? The answer is because God gave the Torah to you. He wanted you to fulfill the mitzvot. He wanted it to be you with your imperfections, with your challenges, to overcome them and to serve him and do the mitzvot and make this world a better place, specifically because we struggle with other things and doing the mitzvot is not so easy all the time. And, it takes work, it takes struggle, and that's what God wants. That's exactly the point. He didn't give it to the angels. Despite their protest, he gave it to us because he wants us to make this world a better place, and he wants us to bring heaven down to earth and bring godliness into this world. And that is the lesson of Shavuot. That is the purpose of the Torah. And thank you all for joining today. It's been very lovely. If anyone has any questions or ideas that they'd like to share before we sign off, feel free.
Thank you, Malka. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Malka.
Thank you so much.
The essence of Shavuot and why it's such an important moment in the life of Judaism.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Beautiful.
And thank you, Janet. And like Janet was saying, it is such an important moment. And like we mentioned in the beginning of the class, this Shavuot, we should really reframe it, that it's not just us remembering that God gave us the Torah, it's actually God re-gifting us the Torah anew. And that's why it's so important for every single person to come to synagogue and hear the 10 commandments. It's actually a really big mitzvah to be in the synagogue and hear the Torah reader read the 10 commandments. And so much so that even little children are supposed to come into the synagogue and hear, even small babies are supposed to hear the 10 commandments being read, because that is the moment when God gives us the Torah anew. It's our anniversary with God. It's the day that we recommit to the Torah, recommit to doing the mitzvot, and recommit to one another as well, to our Ahavat Yisrael, to our kindness to each other. So that's all for tonight. We'll see you on Shabbat. We'll see you on Shavuot. And thank you all for logging on. Thank you so much, ladies. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.